So back in 2007, I found myself working as a bartender at a now-closed pub in my hometown. Not a job that I particularly liked, but it paid the bills. At this time, they had hired a new kitchen manager that we all simply knew as Kearney. Kearney was a pleasant enough man, mostly keeping to himself, but always stayed late to help the barmen do our closing duties, so we all liked him for that. New in town, Kearney had yet to find a place of permanent residence, and I had recently lost my tenant, so somebody suggested that he ask me. He was considerably older than the tenants that I usually took in, but having had a streak of bad luck with tenants my own age, I thought an older man with a nice steady job, maybe a shift in the right direction. So I agreed. Kearney wasted no time and followed me home that very same night. Only he wasn't alone. Enter Lawrence, the boyfriend of Kearney. Honestly, I hadn't even realized that he had a boyfriend up to that point, but it was water off my back regardless. Looking back now, what really should have bothered me though was Lawrence's appearance. He looked like he had been sleeping on the street, rather appropriately as I would later find out. So Kearney moved in, and Lawrence was there a lot too, and it was easy to know when due to his mobile ringtone sounding like a quacking of duckling. Kearney had some habits that were rather noteworthy to the story in particular. 1. He basically never closed his bedroom door. No matter what he was doing in there, it was always opened. And 2. Although he was a very heavy smoker, he never once smoked inside the house. So Kearney had been living there for about 2 weeks when I had come down with an awful case of pink eye, this being highly contagious. I was given leave of absence from my bartending job, and therefore decided to go wait it out at my sister's for a few days. Apparently, I didn't mind giving it to her. Sorry, sis. So the day my sister was scheduled to come to pick me up, no, I couldn't drive yet. I took a casual stroll into the bar that myself and Ben, a good friend from high school, and at the time coworker, had been building in my house. And something caught my eye. All of our liquor bottles were completely empty. Now those who had been frequenting my house at the time would know that we weren't just talking about 1 or 2 bottles of brandy here, but bottles of whiskey, gin, vodka, schnapps, liqueurs. Basically, it was a fully stocked bar that could host a pretty big party, without requiring much in the way of additions. So I called Kearney in, asking him what he knew about this, receiving feedback that Lawrence and he had been on a slight drinking binge. And those were the actual words that he used. And that had left me both furious about the thousands worth of stock they had drunk out, but also slightly impressed that he was actually still alive. Regardless, I said that I would be dealing with this upon my return. So I'm with my sister for a few days, and on Friday, I get a call from the local police department asking me if I know Conrad Schultz. Ironically enough, I didn't. They finally add that I'll probably know him as Kearney, and that I should probably come down to the station, as they had just arrested his boyfriend, trying to sell my camera equipment. So my sister rushes me back to home, where all my camera equipment was on display at the police station. It's on this visit that I'm informed that Lawrence was actually a Navy SEAL who got dishonorably discharged before turning to a life of crime and now had a rap sheet the length of the Bible. The kicker was that both he and Kearney were actually homeless men who had met at the Salvation Army. So Lawrence is in jail and my sister drops me off at home, more or less the same time that Kearney gets home as well. Based on Kearney's account of what had happened, he had turned to Lawrence in himself, as he couldn't allow Lawrence to do to me what he was trying to do. Although I had appreciated his sacrifice, I still told Kearney that he would have to go, having been the overall cause of all of this. However, not wanting to leave the homeless man while homeless, I gave him until the end of the month to make other arrangements. So Monday comes, and having just completed our staff meeting, I walk home to encounter a very much free Lawrence, sitting on the sidewalk across my house watching it. I confront Lawrence as to why he's there, and he tries to apologize before begging for money, rather out of character really. I dismissed him without giving him a cent. Now I go back to the previous night. See, I had mentioned the staff meeting for a reason, as it was at that meeting where we had gotten a rather sizable list of liquor bottles that had gone missing from the storeroom, leaving us all suspecting each other. I, however, would not have to wait long to figure out who the real culprit was, as a few days later, I opened the garage bin in my kitchen to see the missing bottles, all empty and staring back at me. I decided to sit on this information for the time being, although I did photograph it just for in case I need it as an evidence later. I had also called over Ben to inform him of the developments, as this was quickly becoming a detective game. We decided to enter Kearney's room to search for further evidence. Nothing of vast significance in there, with one exception: 2 single photographs of Lawrence, before he had turned into the homeless version of Lex Luthor or Charles Xavier. Actually, there were several of Lawrence's things still there, but as Lawrence had spent a lot of time there before the incident, I accepted this as normal. Now, I should also add that I mentioned Lawrence's release to Kearney and had told him that if I even suspected that they were still seeing each other, I would throw him out of the house myself. Only a few days would pass before this came into play. On this particular night, I had been bartending again, and Kearney had constantly been stopping by the bar to help himself to draught glasses half full of wine and half full of Coke, which he would go drink outside the restaurant. We confronted him about this, but as he correctly pointed out, he was still a manager and we had no right to tell him what he could or could not do. On his 4th trip, however, I had grown suspicious and decided to follow him outside, where I encountered Lawrence sitting outside, sharing the half Coke, half wine concoctions with Kearney. This upset me, so the next day I returned to the restaurant with my photographic evidence, and I handed it over to the general manager, who was also kind of a friend of mine. Although I hadn't physically seen it, I had heard the confrontation through the office door when he had fired Kearney. Kearney laughed, obviously upset, and apparently had no idea that I had been the one who had turned him in. So we had closed early that night and I was walking home, going past the high school. I saw Kearney coming from the opposite direction. He walked past me, literally only saying 2 words, "I'm scared," before disappearing into the darkness. That would be the last time that I would ever physically lay my eyes on Conrad Schultz. So we reached the final week before Kearney's eviction was to take place. Ben had come to stay with me for that duration, as we both wanted to monitor the situation and make sure that nothing else happens. It was in this week that Kearney's behavior suddenly changed. He was constantly smoking in his room and his door was closed 24/7. In fact, neither Ben nor I had caught so much as a peek of him in that entire last week, which we hadn't thought much of at the time. So, the day of Kearney's eviction comes around. Ben had gone home for a few hours and I finally hear Kearney's bedroom door open. Someone walks out of the room, opens the front door and leaves. I follow him outside, but somehow he had already completely disappeared. What was left, though, was his house keys, indicating that he obviously wasn't planning to come back. I took a look at the keys and noticing something strange. Although the correct keys were all on the keychain, there were also several that weren't mine. Why would he leave me the wrong keys? I remember myself thinking as I walked into his room. His room was a shock. Not because of the state that it was in. The 2 had broken his bed in an act of wild getting it on. But I had known about that already, as I said. He never closed his door. But more that he had literally left almost all of his belongings behind, with one exception. You guessed it. The 2 photos of Lawrence. Upon further investigation, I suddenly realized that all traces of Lawrence ever being there had completely vanished, with all of Kearney's stuff left behind. There was one thing of Lawrence's left behind though, his duckling ringtone, which it turned out hadn't been so much a ringtone as an actual duckling, which now strolled around casually in the vacant bedroom. We named him Neville. So Ben returns and gets updated about the developments. Both of us are thinking the way he left was rather weird, of course. I mean, the whole thing had been weird. It was only when I asked the infamous question that this all became a conspiracy theory. Did you ever actually see Kearney in this last week? It was to our shock that we realized that neither of us had. Suddenly putting the puzzle pieces together, the changing habits, Neville the duck, the wrong keys, only Lawrence's stuff being gone. It was a great discomfort that we both asked the question, who had really been living in our house this last week? And during the next few days, Ben and I went on a mission, searching the town, crawling into drain pipes, trying to find any trace of Kearney's whereabouts, but they all added up to nothing. Conrad Schultz had simply vanished off the face of the earth. That wasn't the case with Lawrence, though. No, he was still around, having made some new homeless friends. We encountered him several times begging on the streets. I asked him every time, "Where's Kearney, Lawrence?" But he just acted like he had never heard of him. The last time I would see Lawrence was across from work, attempting to break into a car. I had called the cops on him and they had arrived rather quickly, arresting him on the spot. While he was being led away by the police, I shouted after him one last time, "Where is Kearney?" But he just ignored me and let the cops drag him away. The next day, I filed a police report reporting Kearney as a missing person and suggesting that Lawrence may know something about it. But nothing ever came of it. So Lawrence, I don't know if you did something to Kearney or not, but if you did, I don't want to see you again. Update. For those of you asking what happened to Neville the duck, we kept him for quite a while, but due to the malnourishment that he had received his first few months, he just never grew and ultimately passed away. For those asking if anything ever came of the case, well, unfortunately not. I should probably add that South Africa has a unique way of closing cases, as in after a month or two they just send you a text saying, "Case closed due to lack of evidence of case closed with no arrests." I didn't get one in this case, but did get one in an armed robbery that I fell victim to back in 2017. So I'm not too hopeful that they did too much effort here. Regarding Lawrence, I saw him one more time after getting him arrested. He was only locked up for about a week. After that, though, he disappeared. Not sure if he left town or he got arrested again. So this takes place this past Halloween when it was my first semester in college. I'm a freshman female. It was Halloween, and while my amazing roommate was getting drunk and partying with my ex-friends for the 100th time, so I was alone and bored in my dorm room. Granted, I didn't want to risk the chance of getting sick, but I also couldn't stand being in that room any longer. Screw it, I wanted to party. So I started looking around on my phone. I forgot how exactly I came across her, but a girl who was a self-proclaimed freshman invited a group of 10 people to this party that her friends were throwing. Social distance and everything she had promised us. Luckily, a couple of my friends wanted to jump on this party, granted that we be careful. So the girls sent us the address and told us to tell the people that Monica had invited us. Well, that's where things got weird. One of my ex-friends decided, hey, screw it. Let's not wait any longer for us to get ready, and granted I was still putting on my makeup. And he went to the party himself. When he got there, he did exactly as this Monica had said, and the guy there refused to let him in. Granted, this ex-friend was a little weird, so we thought, hey, what the heck, we'll just leave if we sense that something is off. After driving there in my friend's Steve's car, my friend and I, Mary, got out of the back seats and were instantly dumbfounded. Like we weren't expecting a castle or anything. But this place was a literal dump and the neighborhood was extremely dirty and dark. Well, even though we got the creeps from this place, we did just spend 30 minutes getting there, so whatever. We walked to the door and this guy who was absolutely plastered and at least on 3 different drugs answers. We tell him that we're Monica's friends. Confused, he looks at Mary and I and just silently nods and opens the door for us to come in, ignoring Steve completely. Well, what met us was certainly not what we had expected. There were around 20 frat guys huddled around a table filled with booze and drugs, silently watching a girl there, giving a guy a lap dance. No masks or anything. We were the only ones that were wearing them. Confused and horrified, we silently head down a huge black staircase that was smack dab in the middle of the cramped living room. What greeted us was not another group of people or Monica and her friends that supposedly had invited us there. Instead, I kid you not, at least 8 black locked doors or more that looked like they came out of a Saw movie greeted us. After trying one of the doors, Steve looked down in horror as the adjacent door slowly opened. What looked like 2 at least middle-aged, greasy men came crawling out, looking at Mary and I in a weirdly perverted way. Unlocking and entering one of the numerous doors, we could only watch in horror as another bouncer-looking man came out of nowhere and started screaming at Steve. "Who the heck invited you guys here?" "Monica," we all reply, really confused. The dude, just looking bemused, goes, "Who the heck is Monica?" We take that as our cue to leave, and we hardly run up fast enough before the bouncer starts to shove and tries to tackle Steve towards the ground. And leaving that house confused as heck, we finally see Monica and 2 other scandalously clothed girls, literally looking as white as a sheet. She gives a small, awkward giggle and a wave, and we floor it the heck out of there, never looking back. Yeah, don't go to random parties in large cities that you're unfamiliar with. The weird part, or really not so weird part, was that Monica was trying to get me to come alone, knowing that I was a girl. In all honesty, I think the people at the party and Monica really only had a problem with Steve, and totally did not expect Mary to bring her boyfriend, or for me to come with friends. Afterwards, Steve told us that he believed it was either a drug house or something much worse, and they had tried luring Mary and I in. So, I used to work as a personal trainer at a very familiar gym in my city to help pay for college. The neighbor of this gym was located as 2 other gyms across the street, so we would have a lot of clients changing from place to place. I worked the night shift since I was out of class at about 6 p.m. and worked from 6:30 to 10:30. Usually, a lot of guys would go for experimental classes at night, and I was known for working with the bodybuilders. At around 9 p.m., this huge dude with a very arrogant posture walked in for experimental classes. The secretary immediately sent him to me, and I was more than happy to help him out, although I was pretty sure he already worked out and needed no help whatsoever. Weird, but okay. Throughout the entire hour, this guy would ask me very personal questions. Where do you live? Are you single? What's your shoe size? And as I was working, I just politely tried to keep our conversation focused on training and exercises and that type of stuff. When the class was over, he looked at me and said, "Can I have your number?" "I'm sorry, but I have a fiance." It was true. "Are you sure? I don't usually take no as an answer." "Yeah, I am here just to help you exercise properly. Nothing else." Then this guy puts his finger at my face and goes, "When I get my gun, you won't say no to me." And he walked out of the door. For almost a month, I needed to ask a male coworker to go with me to the parking lot after my late night shift, because this guy would be at the corner waiting for me to get out. He would stare at me and smile and wait for me to leave. Later, I found out that he was at the gym across the street and took my car as the license plate. I had to ask one of my clients that was a cop to scare him out. Until this day, I can't get his smiling face out of my head.